6 people were murdered on a remote German farm in 1922. But this is not the shocking part. The shocking part is this: the killer didn't leave. He stayed inside the house. He slept in the same rooms as the dead. He fed the animals. He lit the fire. And for several days, he lived there, completely alone, with the bodies. No one knows who he was. And no one knows why he never ran. When police arrived at Hinterkaifeck, they immediately understood something was wrong. But not in a normal way. Not crime scene wrong. More like reality didn't fit the scene. There was no sign of forced entry. No stolen money. No broken escape route. But inside the house, someone had clearly been living there after the murders. Food had been eaten. The stove was still warm. Beds had been used. And then there was the snow. Footprints in the yard, leading into the farm. But not leading out. Let that sink in. Someone walked in, but never walked away. Hinterkaifeck was isolated, deep in the Bavarian countryside, about 1 mile from the nearest village. Surrounded by dense forest, locals avoided it. They called the woods the Devil's Forest. Inside lived the Gruber family, Andreas Gruber, his wife, their daughter Victoria, her 2 children, and a newly hired maid. 6 people, completely alone, and over time, the house began to feel wrong, not broken, wrong. Months before the murders, things started to happen that no one could explain. A maid reported footsteps in the attic. Slow, heavy, measured, like someone pacing above her head. Every time she checked, the attic was empty. But the footsteps returned. Again, and again. Then something even more disturbing happened. A newspaper appeared inside the house, a fresh edition, from Munich. But no one had bought it. No delivery record existed. It simply appeared, inside. Then a key disappeared. A spare key to the farm. Gone, without explanation. At the same time, animals began escaping at night, even though the gates were locked. And then, the family began hearing it too. Footsteps. Inside the house. Not outside. Inside. And every time Andreas Gruber searched, he found nothing. No intruder, no explanation, just silence. That felt wrong. March 1922, snow covered the ground, and Andreas Gruber stepped outside and froze. Footprints, fresh, coming from the forest, leading straight into the farm. He followed them. They led to an outbuilding. The lock was broken. Someone had entered, but inside, there was no one, no stolen goods, no trace of escape. Only one fact remained. Someone had arrived, but never left. At this point, investigators assumed something simple. A robbery gone wrong, a break-in that escalated, a crime of opportunity. But then they checked the house again. Nothing was stolen. Money remained. Valuables untouched. Food had been carefully used. This wasn't chaos, it was maintenance. Someone wasn't just hiding, they were living here. March 31st, 1922, a new maid arrived. Her name was Maria. She had heard the rumors. Everyone had. The attic sounds, the isolation, the warnings. But she needed work, so she went anyway. She entered the farm. That evening, she disappeared from history. She would never be seen alive again. No one heard anything. No screams. No gunshots. No alarm. Just silence. When villagers finally entered days later, what they found made no sense. 4 bodies in the barn, 1 forced trauma. A heavy farm tool was used, one by one. But something was wrong. They hadn't died together. They had been separated, lured, individually, into the barn. One detail still disturbs investigators today: a 7-year-old girl. She didn't die immediately. She survived for hours, lying in the hay, next to her dead family, in silence, in pain. She pulled her own hair out before dying alone. That detail changes everything. This was not chaos, it was controlled, sequential, deliberate. But the barn wasn't the end. Inside the house, 2 more bodies were found: the maid and a 2-year-old child, killed separately, inside the home. But here is what broke investigators. The house was still functioning. Food had been cooked. Animals were fed. Fireplaces were used. Beds had been slept in. Someone was still there, after the murders. This is where the case breaks logic. Because most killers leave immediately. But here, the killer stayed for days, sleeping in rooms filled with death, walking through silence, eating in the same kitchen, living inside the aftermath. Criminologists still cannot explain it, because it suggests only 2 possibilities. Either the killer knew the family, or the killer already lived there, long before the murders. One name kept returning: Lawrence Schlittenbauer. He knew the family. He was one of the first at the scene, and he behaved unusually calm. He entered the house without hesitation, moved through rooms, as if he already knew the layout, but nothing was ever proven. No evidence, no confession, only suspicion that never turned into truth. 1 year later, the farm was demolished, and beneath the floorboards, they found it. The murder weapon, a mattock, covered in dried blood and hair. But here is the problem. It had not been discovered during earlier searches. Which means one thing: either it was missed, or someone returned later to place it there. Over 100 suspects. A century of investigation. No conviction. No confirmed killer. Only one fact remains unchanged: 6 people were murdered. Someone stayed inside that house and then disappeared without leaving a trace. So the question is not just who did it. The real question is who was still living at Hinterkaifeck after everyone else was already dead. Because the most disturbing part of Hinterkaifeck is not who did it, it's that whatever happened there worked perfectly. So now I want your answer. Not as a viewer, but as a detective. Which theory actually survives the evidence? 1. Lawrence Schlittenbauer. 2. A long-term intruder, already inside the farm. 3. A sudden escalation that spiraled completely out of control. 4. Someone who was never identified. But be careful, because in this case, every theory explains something. And every theory fails somewhere else. Leave your answer in the comments and see which version other people can actually defend.